This is a fictional dramatization. A millionaire needed a new manager, and the way he found one had nothing to do with resumes. He invited 3 finalists to his private office under the promise of a conventional interview. Only he knew the real test had already begun the moment they walked into his building. Carlos arrived first, wearing a pressed shirt and a practiced smile. He had the look of someone used to being noticed. Quick small talk, a confident stride, a resume with neat bullet points and an air of entitlement. The woman who followed carried a leather portfolio and a steady calm. Her references were impeccable and her answers polished. Last was Gustavo Sanchez, the night janitor from the very building where the interview took place. A quiet man with calloused hands, thrift store jacket, and eyes that had seen too much and learned more. His resume listed odd jobs, a GED, and a short line about rehabilitation, enough to make the millionaire curious, not enough to make him the obvious pick. They took seats in a waiting room that looked ordinary enough: magazines, potted plants, a receptionist behind glass. What none of them knew was that the millionaire, watching from an observation room, had staged a small sequence of encounters to measure something resumes couldn't show: character under pressure. If this story is the kind that makes you question what truly matters in leadership, keep watching. A maintenance worker shuffled in, carrying a ladder and a paint bucket covered in smudges of white. The receptionist barely looked up. Her voice clipped. She told him to hold the ladder until later. There was no courtesy, only irritation. Carlos glanced at the man and smirked almost imperceptibly, folding his hands, making a show of impatience. The female candidate pursed her lips as if the worker were inconveniencing her time. Gustavo, however, rose without ceremony. He offered to help arrange the ladder in the corner and called the worker by name, asking if he needed a hand with the bucket. Gustavo's movements were small, almost unnoticed. A sleeve wiped, a ladder steadied, but his attention was generous, and his face was kind. A few minutes later, an elderly man shuffled in. He smelled faintly of the street. His coat was thin, and he trailed an empty paper bag. The room fell into a kind of quiet awkwardness. The privileged candidates exchanged looks, measuring social risk. The female candidate shifted away on her chair. Carlos made a joke under his breath, a sound meant to dismiss. Gustavo unbuttoned his coat, reached into his own bag, and took out a modest sandwich wrapped in wax paper. He hesitated only long enough to ask the old man if he was hungry. When the man nodded, Gustavo tore the sandwich in half and offered the larger piece with both hands. He spoke softly to him, called him sir, asked his name, listened as if he had all the time in the world.
The millionaire watched Gustavo's hands more than his face. Rough palms gently handing over food, a tilt of the head that made room for dignity. There was no audience in that exchange, beyond the ones who pretended not to watch, and yet it was everything. The candidates were then led, separately, into the millionaire's office for a simple exercise. On the desk lay a single sheet of paper with one question printed in a modest font. Do you consider yourself a good person? Why or why not? Carlos answered first with practiced moral logic, listing achievements, volunteer stints, a tidy morality that sounded rehearsed. The woman spoke next, confident and composed. She framed goodness in terms of responsibility and efficiency, the kind of answer that reassured a boardroom. When Gustavo was called, he sat with a small breath and put his hands together on his knee. He did not defend himself with achievements. He said, plainly, "No, not always. I made bad choices. I hurt people. I stole. I drank when I shouldn't have. I went to prison for a short time. I got clean after my sister wouldn't speak to me. That was the worst and the best thing that ever happened. Now I sweep floors, and sometimes I mess up, but I try to be better every day. That doesn't make me good all the time, but it makes me someone who wants to be better." His voice did not ask for forgiveness. It offered accountability. He talked about small acts, returning lost keys, sitting with a coworker who cried about her son, as if kindness were a muscle he was learning to use. He admitted his shortcomings. He named the people he had harmed and the ways he had tried to make amends. There were no grand promises, only a steady, visible willingness to change. Back in his observation room, the millionaire had been silent through it all. He was not a man who wanted a miraculous speech. He wanted to see whether values would survive the ease of neglect or the lure of pretense. What he had set up were 3 quiet morality plays: the worker's ladder, the hungry old man, the single question. Each revealed how someone behaved when no one in power was directly watching. When he finally stood and entered the room with all 3 candidates, the millionaire explained what had happened. He told them in an even tone that the building, the receptionist, and the staged encounters were part of a live appraisal, not of skill, but of character. He praised competence, he said, but he insisted competence without humility can be dangerous. He described leadership as a responsibility to protect dignity of clients, of employees, of strangers, and he wanted someone who understood that in their bones. Then he named Gustavo. The room inhaled. Gustavo looked down, surprised, then up, cheeks flushing with a modest kind of disbelief.
The millionaire spoke of Gustavo's honesty in the interview, of the quiet generosity in the waiting room, of the courage it takes to call your past by its name and still show up every day ready to try. He offered Gustavo the role of manager, not as a reward for raw talent, but as a recognition that character can be cultivated and that people with hard-won humility can become the best guardians of a healthy workplace. Carlos's smile dropped into polite acceptance. He thanked the millionaire for the opportunity and shook Gustavo's hand with something like regret easing into the gesture. The female candidate nodded, composed, her confidence intact but reoriented. None were humiliated, none were mocked. They left with the quiet sting of reflection, which, the millionaire hinted, might be the most useful outcome for them. Gustavo accepted. His first act as manager, he said, would be to institute a small fund for staff in need and an open-door hour where anyone could come speak without appointment. He spoke of training programs and fair schedules, and simply of listening. The millionaire nodded. It was not a story of instant miracles, but of measured trust, a second chance granted with conditions attached to accountability and service. In the weeks that followed, the office hummed differently. People who had felt invisible noticed that their work mattered. The millionaire did not boast about the test. He only occasionally checked in, pleased that his choice honored the quiet work of rebuilding a life. Gustavo made mistakes on the way. He apologized publicly when he did, and he kept proving his reliability with the small, steady acts that had always defined him. The lesson the millionaire hoped would stick was modest and clear. Experience and polish are valuable, but the capacity to be humble, honest, and compassionate changes the tenor of a workplace. Leadership rooted in dignity can transform ordinary moments into ethical practice, and sometimes the person least likely to be chosen on paper is exactly the one who will protect the people around him. If this story made you reconsider what you look for in a leader, leave a comment below. What would you have done in Gustavo's place? If you appreciate stories that challenge our ideas about success, like and subscribe for more dramatized tales that highlight character over credentials.